So, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome for this afternoon. We are totally proud as University of St. Gallen, as ESA, to have such a great panel here with us to discuss the topic Internet of Things and its impact on society. I guess we will start off a little bit more technically, but then move on to the social topics that are of real relevance. So this Internet of Things is relevant because it's not just a single kind of technology. It combines this wireless development, the sensors, the cloud, the mobile phones, and the machine learning, as you will see down the road. Let me briefly introduce you to our panelists here. First, on my side, here the left side from my side, is Marianne. She is head of Microsoft Switzerland since 2015 and is dealing, as she's done before in Germany, with the digital transformation. Also of this very country, you're implementing now Swiss data centers, which I think is very important with our data security standards we want to look for. And before that, you worked at Daimler, but also at European Aeronautic Defense and Space Company. You have a doctorate of law from Würzburg. Then we have Hiroaki Kitano. Hiroaki Kitano is president and CEO of Sony Computer Science Laboratories from Japan. He's an international renowned expert in artificial intelligence and bioinformatics. And he's in some way transforming in a digital way healthcare as well with your work. Hiroaki is very well known for his groundbreaking work when he invented the Aibo, that little dog actually that changed also part of my life, and also he introduced the RoboCup. That's when robots play soccer, maybe better than the Munich guys. And we have Hiroaki, sorry for that, that's local. Hiroaki is also a professor at the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology and Graduate University, amongst many other things. He has a PhD in computer science from Kyoto and is a holder of several prestigious awards. And then, of course, we have Volkhard Bregulla. He's Vice President, Global Industries, Manufacturing and Distribution of Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And he's driving forward the digital transformation in the manufacturing and distribution industry, an industry that's very relevant, of course, to the Internet of Things. He's with Hewlett Packard Enterprise since 1985. Did I read that right? So had many different responsibilities, including the Internet of Things programs. You know, in 1985, there was green screens, there was floppy disks, it was kind of the Stone Age, it was 32 years prior to iPhones, so you actually learned
the dark age.
Yeah, definitely. You have an electrical engineering degree from Nuremberg and finance and quantitative methods from Edinburgh. So we're very proud to have you here, and we start off with the brief introduction statements of each panelist, and I really ask you to start with Marianne.
Thank you. Yes, to me, the Internet of Things is like a little bit of a revival, because if we think about the scenarios we put into life today, everything was already thought about at least 20 years or even more. And what is interesting about today having the technology in place and being able to democratize this technology to make it accessible to really to everybody is that this is really one of the biggest, I would say, cooperation projects we have. And that's something I really find inspiring and challenging at the same time, and where we as companies, but everybody acting in the marketplace should be aware of and play its role.
Thank you so much. I just hand over to our longest traveling guest from Japan.
Yeah, I mean, I travel 12 hours and a half. Yeah. So, okay. Well, I mean, IoT and also combined with artificial intelligence robotics, we believe it's transforming the society, and that's a lot of people mentioned, not just this symposium, everywhere. But like, well, one of the things I noticed actually all the discussions about like, future of jobs and how job opportunity would be a sacrifice and possible use of AI. This has actually a little bit different implications, different parts of the world. I mean, in Europe and the United States, we talk about like, job opportunity risks. That's kind of big issue people talking about. But in Japan, that's completely different. We are serious, the labor force shortage. And we actually in agreement, we have to have like AI robotics deployed as fast as possible to sustain our economy. That's the reality in Japan. So now we are predicting our population actually drops like a 30%, 40% down by the end of the century. If that is a significant decrease in the labor force and the populations in Japan, and the only way we're going to do is we change the immigration, but still we have to have like a big introduction of AI robotics to sustain the economy. So that the impact of technology in the job opportunity is dramatically different in the country that you live in. And the second thing is actually what people implicitly assume is that the AI, robotics, and IoT is something that we're going to replace the job. They're assuming that the things we're going to build is something at the human level. Therefore, we actually are replacing the job of, with the human capabilities. And that is not what technology we are not looking into. So I'd like to show you the video. Can you play the video? And I shot like a 1.5 minute video. You have to have like all the sensors and AI in it. So I just pick up like image sensor. This is rotating dish, and if you look at this, and that's like a color image. What's going on here is 1,000 frames per second, very fast camera, which Sony and this Ishikawa lab in University of Tokyo developed. And with this, all the spinning things, and you can readjust like speed of spinning with the camera and all the prism in between on the feedback control system. Now this ultracentrifuge, you can actually stand still and you can see this. So this is not something what the people can do, and in the human eye, this is completely not possible. And this is a little simple robot that actually is doing rock, scissors and papers and never lose. Because this is again the 1,000 frames per second camera, which can detect the slight motion of the human hands and it actually react accordingly. And with this speed of the detections, and this is top-notch technology today, and what you're actually looking into is something far beyond human capabilities. Not really, what we're trying to achieve the human level. And if things go beyond human capability, we actually consider we can do a lot more new things that actually may create job opportunities. And this is something we just around the video about it. This is a commercial level. Sony's new Alpha 9 imager is actually, this is the middle of midnight, new moons in a beach, completely black. And this is, you see the ISO number, so you can, if you are familiar with the camera, you see how things are going. We can continuously increase the sensitivities, and you see what happens. Okay, so this image looks like a completely daytime at the end, and this is not what human can do. It's like what we're actually trying to get there is get the sensor systems to acquire the information of the world, get the high-speed AI system to the data crunching to learn and understand, make a decision, and behave. And that's far beyond human capability. That means that maybe some impact in job, but more than that, we have more opportunities because we can do more things. For example, like autonomous driving, we can reduce the traffic accident dramatically, or you can actually do other manufacturing and other services as well, or possible medical systems. We can use the fast imaging and AI technology and ultrasound technology to completely, with the pinpoint, diagnosis as well. So, you see now the image is just like daylight, but this is actually again at midnight in a beach. Okay, so the implication here, I will stop here now for the initial presentation, is what we are looking into is actually far beyond human capability at the end. Therefore, we will explore opportunities, and then we have an IoT system. My belief is there will be more job opportunities, but also we have like a transformation of the skills. But we should be able to cope with that if we do it properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiroaki, for that.
So, thank you very much. I think you've made a great point, which I'm deriving to. But let me shape the topic and open the viewpoint a little bit in terms of saying what is the impact actually on the society. And I really believe that we are coming to conclusions too quickly on some of the IoT use cases. And that's, for example, one of them. So one thing what we are saying is all of the IoT, the digitization, is really, and that's a claim, is completely changing the way we act, the way we socially interact with one another. And that's a statement we do. Well, we're not thinking about really what it is which has changed, because is that really the case when you look at that? So we are saying all these kids, they can't behave themselves, they're not talking to each other, but did we do that 30 years ago on our way to work? No, we didn't. So the thinking I want to sort of stimulate is what has changed, and how can we take that change into the use cases moving forward? And there are more dramatic changes, which are even more obvious. Look at this. This is 1905. It's very hard to spot a car. That's Fifth Avenue in New York. But look at a decade later. Here is it. Look a decade later. You have difficulties in spotting the horse. So that's 10 years later. So there's impact in technology, and that varies. What's the impact on society, and what does it create? And here comes Uber. I know what you think, another guy talking about Uber. But what I want to come to is demystify it a little bit, just open your viewpoint. Is it really that new either? And when you look at it, it is actually not. This is how it looked more than 100 years ago. That was a sales guy, it's actually a car salesman out of Chicago by the name of L.P. Draper. He realized that people can't go to work. There is a jam in hopping on a bus, hopping on public transportation. So he invented the jitney car, and this is what it is. So basically people could put a 5-cent sign in their cars and take someone else on and do a ride share. It was actually invented 100 years ago, and guess what? In most of the metropolitans in the United States, they had more ride shares 100 years ago than Uber has today. So my claim again is what is new, and is actually all around the technology and not necessarily the business model. And let me give you another proof by starting with our own legacy, which was HP. Now we have spun off a couple of companies now called HPE, and we're really talking a lot about the IoT or the digital transformation, build the products around it. But when you look at our legacy, we were greatly admired for the imaging and printing business model, which is actually leading the market with a loss-leading product and creating a double-digit billion business on supplies, which was greatly profitable. We were admired for it, but guess what? It was actually 80 years old by the time we took it on. It came out of the razor industry by really giving the razor for free and making the money with the blade. And guess what? It works today. In this country, one of the market leaders applying that business model is Nespresso. They have managed to sell a kilogram of coffee for 80 euros. It makes me feel good because our ink doesn't appear to be that expensive anymore. So we are very grateful for Nespresso, but it works again and again. So also here, when people get into this frenzy about new business models, it is actually the adoption of an existing business model with the help of new technology, and that is what we develop at HPE. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for this introduction statement. Let me ask a first very precise question that really boils down to the Internet of Things. So when we look at the Internet of Things, the new thing is that things are connected to the Internet. So what is the value of that connectivity? Why should that enable these new business models? So what's the original value? Well, I mean, that's a question I get always from my mother. But, you know, who wants to answer that? It's a tricky one.
Well, the value basically is that you have exact information about, you know, the constitution of anything, and you can use that to do something. And coming back to my original statement, this value and the positive sides of having all the information you need about a certain thing, you know, that's very old. So all the scenarios and the, I would say, the opportunities we see in every industry and is I think all the scenarios are already there and very alive. So the value discussion, I think we have already evolved, that nobody's really questioning that. It would be interesting that in the discussion to see if there is anybody really questioning the value, or if it's more on, we heard that the business models are there, the how to, you know, we recognize the value, but we really do not know, because the complexity of the interaction of the different actors in this marketplace is so
if it's
complex.
valuable, honestly, who is paying for connectivity then? I mean, everybody wants to have it, but do you make money on connectivity with things these days? That would be a question to more maybe the hardware guys.
Well, I think this connectivity is actually, this is like a supplier's logic, basically. So like, all the manufacturers and the company actually claim they have it connected. But it doesn't really, guarantee the value proposition with the consumer side. So we have to actually have a very specific value additions by having things connected for the consumers. It's a very clear thing, and I work a lot in biomedical. And biomedical, you want to actually, not really connecting, but you want to have like a omics data. You want to have like a gene. You want to have like a, proteomics. You want to have like all the measurement, X-ray and CT scan, everything. But like at the end of the day, you have to improve the patient, quality of life and the decision making. That's the value we can provide by actually measuring a lot of things. In the healthcare industry, you are prohibited to measure anything extra unless you're proven to have a additional value on the, curing the patient. So like, if you apply this, it's a slightly different domain. You can't really straightforward apply, but like you have to have like value to the consumers. Otherwise you just keep measuring. You have like all the possible infringement of the privacy, possible like a hacking, possible like and also data costs are gonna be gigantic if you start keeping. But so like but still like if you have like for the measurements and you have specific value additions. For example, like a traffic. You want to actually have all the car to be connected. You want to have autonomous driving. You want to have like all the traffic patterns optimized. And that actually clear value to the consumer, because you actually get the transportation smoother, improve sustainability, and then probably less traffic accident. So that would be the clear, tangible value by connecting things like automobile and traffic and the sensor around the towns. But if you have that proposition, I think the value is very obvious, and the automakers or government or consumer can pay for that.
I mean, the thing I would add, and this is to the dismay of all the telcos, connectivity as such doesn't pay any longer, despite the fact there's a huge infrastructure in place. But what pays or what sells is being connected. So that means the access to something where the connection is the conduit to, and this is where the value generation is. So people would really miss being connected to information, being connected to value, and this is where the boom of the cloud is all about. I mean, we build on the next steps because we think that you need to be connected at many stages. But what you need to be connected to as early as possible where the data is generated and build applications around it. So it is without an application, the value will not be created, nobody will pay for it.
Let's dig in there. So if we talk about these applications, then if you come from a manufacturing company, isn't that application kind of always a service that would be added to the things you're selling? So would your company change from providing things from a manufacturer to a service company? Is that kind of mandatory?
So from what I see, it is one of the earliest business model transformation people do. The software industry clearly was the leader. Instead of selling a piece of shrink-wrap software, you download it and then you move to as a service model, which is a success, which I think the software industry has very successfully transformed. And I even see this now with hardware. We have one of the thought-leading projects we have done. It's very well stated. If the compression engine company cares a compressor, he is very public with it. Or even here in this country, the company Hewlett is one of the thought leaders of selling outcome of the product, which is the whole, which is the adjustment rather than the product. And I think that part is an important one. What a lot of people always see, and this is where we come in as an infrastructure provider, is if you transform your model, you have to be really sure that your infrastructure keeps up with it. Because otherwise, you would say, hey, now they have this great new business model, but they can't sell anything any longer, and the revenue is gone. So if you sell a car, yeah, and honestly, if your supply chain doesn't work, you may deliver it 2 days later. If you're on a ride share or on an as-you-go model, the revenue is gone. Someone else takes it. So the infrastructure requirement when you sell your product as a service is much higher. And that's what we focus on to make that transformation successful. But when you look at the automotive companies, they all want in 5, 8 years, depends on what company it is, they want to go up to 30 to 50% of their revenues in as a service, become a mobility service provider rather than a manufacturer of cars which someone buys.
Do you know a single automotive company that makes money today with that?
I think it will take a while. I mean, and honestly, it's also a bit demystifying. And it doesn't mean I want to be critical against Tesla, but you've seen their financial results. Even they don't make money out of the digital economy. They have not managed yet to transform the business model in such a way that clients would pay for the service. So I think there is a major re-engineering of the business model required before that will happen.
Thank you, Marianne.
I still think, adding on what you said, that today there's too many silos still. If we look at what needs to be connected,
yes,
and what kind of standards we still need, especially on the connection part, what kind of ecosystems we need to build and think about. So we've seen companies, and including ourselves, starting to rebuild the business model, go to a more service part of the business model, but we see that we need to have the old and the new in parallel, and we still need, especially for us as a technology provider, we need to add, for example, to our cloud services, we need to add other things to make Internet of Things really viable and accessible to everybody. So there is really work to do, and in the sense that we should not really look for Uber is certainly one example, but it's a very simplistic approach. So there's far more complexity in the system, which makes it very interesting. And I think at the moment what we need is more to look at the complete value chain and work together to have these kind of prepackaged things, including the cloud, the connectivity, some solution to make it far more accessible than it is today. Today it's still very siloed.
Okay, so you want to have the vertical integration for starting...
Vertical and cross-industry, for example. So it's horizontal as well from the technology point of view, and it's vertical, of course, by industry or by value chain.
How do you see that? I mean, how was it
I think we have two things here. One is actually Internet of Things in the context of connecting multiple devices and sensors. Okay, so then the question is, what is the new value that we create by combining multiple things? Right? The other thing is in subscriptions, the cloud service and the devices, so those are, slightly different things. One of the things actually is interesting in subscription model is like a hardware is now going digital now. It's like a digital hardware is dramatically different from analog. If you had analog hardware, you buy it. If you want to improve the hardware, you have to buy the new thing. In a digital hardware, you have like a room to improve because there's software all attached to, or even an FPGA, you can change the circuit slightly in downloading it. So one of the interesting company in Paris, actually, this is the amplifier company called Deviale. And but their actually business model is to sell the hardware, top-notch hardware, and then every 3 months they actually upgrade the software, and sound quality getting better and better because algorithms improve very quickly, much better, much faster than hardware. So the hardware, they actually ask me to ship back every 3 years, 5 years. During that time, sound quality improve continuously because they come up with new algorithms or just improve your sound, add new functions. And this was not possible in analog day. So this makes it very sticky. Yeah. Because you want to keep going with the same company because they have a database on what you're doing and then all the music libraries and then the continuous improvement, you can see that. And you can give them feedback and they reply for that. So like, you know, the analog days, like if the hardware is outdated, it's risky for the manufacturer because people might switch to the other company because there's no strings attached. But now everything is attached, so it's a very different business model.
So this brings me to the next theme, which really deals with exactly what you're saying. So in the early days, you could separate between hardware and software. Not anymore, right? Anymore. So, and now the question is a little bit, the entire world is really buying with pleasure European hardware because it's precise, it's great, and it's shiny, even cars and stuff like that. Entire Europe is really buying US American software services only. Yeah. I mean, we don't have anything here, and besides SAP or so. Where is actually, I mean, is there a war going on? Is the software eating down to hardware? Is hardware eating up? Who will win the race? What's the political impact? I think we have excellent candidates here to discuss this topic. And where is Asia in this game? So who wants to tackle?
Let me get it going. I mean, first of all, we need to peel the onion a little bit and dive deeper down, because I don't think there is a diaspora in software in Europe at all. When you look at universities, particularly on AI, on artificial intelligence, Europe is absolutely the world leader. What you can accuse Europe for is that we don't commercialize it as smart as the American companies do. I mean, a lot of today's algorithms which make a Tesla drive and the AI associated on video analytics and radar and all the connectivity and correlation is actually done in European universities. We have we actually, because of the cultural background, we are not monetizing this as much as we do. So my advice to clients really is, watch out what you need to put in place ahead of time, even if you don't really know what the ROI will be. And that's a risky proposition, particularly in manufacturing. But when you think about Uber, again, because I stated it earlier, it is not that the European or the American standard taxi drivers missed the point. They could not. They were on analog radio. They had no infrastructure. They have seen it coming. They were not stupid. But they had absolutely not been able to compete because the infrastructure was missing. And when you look at the telcos, they did a smart thing in Europe. The telcos invested in intelligent networks and in advanced technology ahead of the market. And at that point in time, the companies didn't even know what services will exist. They did not know what it is. At that time, it was a free phone service or callback service, that's all. But there was expensive infrastructure put in place. But guess what? When the killer service came, which was Google Maps, need to be connected to find the way, then the infrastructure all of a sudden created that return. And it's the same on IoT. People are very careful, but they need to invest and take a risk. Right now in manufacturing, I do worry, because the business cases need to be super duper before anybody starts. So I'm confronted with numbers about 30 to 40% ROI, so cost reduction on those use cases before anyone gets moving. We rather debate it, and that's a bit of the criticism. It has to do with a lot of also the social tax systems, how you, for example, write off investments in Europe versus America. We're just writing it still off, where America has already ripped it off and replaced it. So there's a lot of inhibitors doing that. But my call to action is go ahead and invest, despite the fact that you don't know the ROI, because the one who has it and then sees the business case will compete in such a way that you can't catch up.
So the muscles will train when you walk, not before.
So, and right now, we go to the obvious ones, like predictive analytics examples in manufacturing. This is what everyone buys, and that's our front-running use case in selling it, and that works really well. But anything beyond that, people are very hesitant.
What is the US American, like coming from Microsoft, view on that? I mean, thank you very much for your pro-European statement, and I agree totally that we are very good in computer science, but not so good in web technologies.
I mean, the world we envisage as an American company, first of all, that we are truly global and anchored in all the countries we are doing business. And what we actually do, and it's certainly true for Microsoft, is trying to provide the best platform that will really enable everybody to access and have affordable access to this. I would even call it commodity. And if we look at what's happening in Europe and the chances, it's not about commodity. So everything that's on top and everything that's aggregated in a smart way, because why do people not invest in IoT today, especially in manufacturing? Because they look at these small pieces of the whole thing, and of course, you know, the ROI on a small piece will never be there. So it's again this courage to open up, and we've seen in bigger corporations that within the corporation, having IoT scenarios, use cases works. When you go outside and to start with work with third parties, there the issues start. And I think this is there where, you know, Europe needs more courage, because I think those who will be able to form these ecosystems and have the infrastructure plus the solution in the back will win the race. And it's not about I would call us more the commodity, intelligent commodity provider from the US, who will be the ones. It just needs the courage now to start.
Okay, thank you so much. So what's your take? Looking maybe a little bit at I know Asia, that's wrong word, but...
Yeah. Well, actually, it's, you know, I need to separate, like, you know, the Japan or Asian perspective is also like a Sony perspective. Sony is like a, you know, global conglomerate. Aside from the device and the hardware, we operate globally. For example, like music, I think Sony is the largest music publisher. It is operating predominantly in New York and London. And with the game, actually, hardware is in Tokyo, but like, game design is pretty much in London. And the movies are obviously in Hollywood. Okay, so like I guess, so that's actually what most of the you know, global company does. Actually, we are not an exception for that. But like specifically talking about Japan, for example, you know, I think we recognize the issue of like a software data company eating hardware, which is happening. Like if you look at Google and you know, I don't know Microsoft's hardware side or software side anymore, but like you know, that's a trend. And in the hardware side, actually get threatened. Like particularly in the auto industry, whether the Toyota and the Nissan don't survive, or like you know, Waymo, which is the Google and Tesla and Uber, actually going to marginalize the hardware productions in an EV and autonomous vehicle and slash the entire supply chain in Toyota. You know, so you know, if we actually go from the hardware to expand very quickly into the AI, robotics, and the IoT, and the hardware are gonna survive. But like if the otherwise, hardware are gonna be you know, completely marginalized and get slashed. And the key is, if you look at the Google, actually their strengths in Facebook, strengths in the entire cyberspace. They have a data that dominates, they control the field. But you know, physical real world, that's not the case. Physical world, if you have like you know, Kitano, Komatsu, they know everything. It's not Google or you know. And then you know, then the question is, you got a big data out from the physical real world, and then you got a machine learning. You can have the deep learning and a reinforcement learning. The reality of machine learning is you have to continue to supply the data. You have to continue to tune. And to what data you supply, how you tune, you need the physical real world knowledge. That is not available in IT companies. So this is like, if you go to the physical real world and machine learning combined together, it's very sticky model. It's not like you know, AlphaGo, because AlphaGo is just like a defined rule. You can just go for it. But you know, once you go to the physical world, it's really sticky. So you really have to have expert, top-level knowledge in the physical real world and the business domain. So that's where we see the opportunity of the Japanese and the Asian companies actually go very swiftly go into the you know, expanding into the cloud and the AI service. I think it's like in Germany probably still the same thing because they have like a lot of hardware industries coming. But that's opportunity. But if you fail, like you know, industry gonna be slashed. That's bad for us.
Okay, so maybe we move now towards a little more the society. I mean, industry or business is very relevant for society, but let's move beyond the borders of a company. And that's just touching, before we open up to the public, touching a little bit the topic which is very famous in Europe. It's always this data security and privacy. And if you look at what happened just in the last year also, especially in the field of the Internet of Things, but in a general manner, how do you see actually the development? Are we wakening up slowly, say we cannot give away all that data, everything is insecure, or is this just a typical, let's say, German-speaking or French attitude? If you look at China, it's totally different. If you look at the US, I just don't know. You find both sides. So what's your take on the role of privacy, data security? Will that govern in future more what we are doing, what we are not doing? Who wants to go first?
Well, it's a clear yes for me, even if we have these cultural differences and as well differences between generation maybe. There's a lot of discussion about that, what is private, what is secret. I think, trust is paramount, notwithstanding any culture you live, because at the end you will not use a technology you don't trust. And, beyond the technology, there is always a product around it, maybe some hardware, things you can feel and sense. So to me, this is absolutely paramount to have that trust, especially if we look at the, I would say, mission-critical infrastructures that are involved in a lot of IoT scenarios. We take healthcare, we take energy provision, we take agriculture, where we see, really interesting use cases for society. But on the other hand, all these are mission-critical infrastructures.
I mean, just interrupting a bit, yes, on the B2B sector, yes, we see that, but in the privacy, in the B2C, if you ask somebody, do you care? Yes. If you look at the behavior, no. So people just don't care. So what are we going to do in the future? Is it relevant or is it not? Are we doing totally the wrong thing here? Or who is doing what? Maybe what's your take?
Yeah, but I think it's a tricky issue. So one is privacy, but of course you have to have all the consent and whatever, because regardless of behavior, when people notice that people demands people complain about it, that's for sure. So we have to actually have some guidelines for that and getting consent. At the same time, Sony is working with Google and Amazon and IBM and Microsoft on this partnership on AI, which actually try to have a good practice on AI. One of the big issues is the data will be used for the machine learning or deep learning, and that actually exposes a cultural hidden bias. Machine will going to learn our bias. That's going to be the problem, and that's a big issue. One is the privacy issue. The other is the transparency or the bias that we actually implicitly have in our culture, in a data set. We're going to be learned by the machines. So that's the other thing is what we worry about is kind of astonishing affinity of the big data AI and the social system in China. China, they have big data, and all the privacy, those things doesn't really matter. And so one of the startups in China, in Beijing, for example, Face++, had access to the entire police data, and they have a huge machine learning, they have real-time detection of the individual identification of the millions of people, and that's up and running in Beijing, and they have an AR glass, and then detecting okay, this is the guy, criminals, you're gonna catch this. That's in the real time, and the policeman walking around in a town. And that's not simply possible in our society here. So what we actually facing the reality is affinity of this social system in China and an AI big data is extremely powerful that we realize we are stunned. And we talk about all the privacy issues. At the end of the day, if China or other places like that emerge and they get the highest quality of service and technology, we end up using that. Or we actually live with the inferior service compared with what they have. And this is actually the biggest dilemma we are facing at this moment. And that's a very serious issue, and we don't have a good solution for that. That's a reality.
So it's a culture question. You have the social scoring in China.
Yeah, that's
we
right.
know that it would be better if we collect all health data because privacy kills. So this is really a dilemma.
I mean, it's a cultural thing for sure. When you look at our networking portfolio, when someone asks us what do, we say we connect and protect, and that's our mindset. So we have to optimize the connectivity as much as we protect. When you look at your applications portfolio you have on your handset, then of course every one of us worries about, hey, this application is allowed to do certain things. Yeah? You grant access to XYZ. That's the privacy problem. There's another problem which worries me way more. It's the security issue. It's what the application, because of the flaws and the openness of it, or the lack of protection, allows others to do and penetrate into the system. And unfortunately, meanwhile, is a more than $2.5 billion market in ransomware, in really just making money through theft and identity theft. And that's the worrying part. What is even more worrying for me is that it has not yet arrived, at least we don't know it, let's put it this way, the manufacturing place. The manufacturing area is the most vulnerable environment with a significant damage, which really worries me because of the KPIs of manufacturing, which is keep the system running. And people do not naturally worry about technology. I mean, there are Windows XP systems, which will not be maintained. Yeah, and if you ask people, which we go in and say, wouldn't you like to upgrade, put new security standards, and people shrug their shoulders. Yeah. The other thing is from my perspective also a cultural and a generation problem. It is people, I would say, complain about the overuse of Facebook. That is a different generation, the ones who use it heavily. And they post pictures they just regret maybe 20 years later when they run for presidency. You know? Well, that's what they do. Yeah? I wish that picture would have never been posted, and people don't see that, but that generation does not have that foresight. Yeah? I think it will balance. It will balance when the investments with security comes in and people feel a little bit more safer, then that will be de-escalated. And then I think the attention will really move into manufacturing places. It will move into areas where you have a way larger damage, which is human lives. Yeah? Imagine you have a break-in into an autonomous environment, you accelerate to full speed and drive to the right at 1,000 cars. Yeah? That is the real damage, and that's what we are working on. On the consumer side, I think it will level out when people get more adapted to the technology.
Building on those answers, I will ask my last question now, after opening up to the audience. And the last questions to all three of you would be, my last question to all three of you would be, what is the application field, the Internet of Things application field, with the biggest social impact, in your opinion, or what you see coming in your industry?
I mean, for me at the moment, if we look at the maturity, I see that what I could call agri-tech is going to be the fastest growing, because, you know, the value is here. We have to solve the problem how to feed this planet, how to get rid of all this food waste we have at the moment, how to have a flawless value chain, looking at all the paces. I think if, and this is an if again, we get the player to work with each other. Because today, this is a big market, and this is for me the only open question. If we will have, as a society, we put pressure on that, so this value chain together with the technology providers are going to really start work as an ecosystem. So that's for me, I would say, the easiest where the value is evident today already.
So the precision farming.
It's precision farming, but it goes all through then, you know, the whole, if you want, the whole farm to fork discussion is so evident for society and mankind, but it's dependent on the willingness to cooperate. And this is nothing to do with technology.
Okay, thank you. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a two big global agenda level. The one is like sustainability, including agriculture, so to speak. The other thing I think is the medical, for sure. Is that we can actually have not only like a diagnosis at the hospital, but like if you have our sensors around, like, you know, house, and then tones. Like your slight behavioral change or tone and then or tremor, you can really detect so the possible early onset of dementia or Parkinson's, whatever, or like behavioral change, which is very difficult one to actually transform the people's behavior, whatsoever. It is like high risk of diabetes or whatever, so lifestyle disease. For sure, data intensive, not just a genome data, global data intensive precision medicine and preventive medicine is going to be the big, and that, because this actually impacts people's life. This is going to be the big industry, and it's very clear if we're going to pay for that. So that's a huge thing.
So it would have been for me number 1, 2, particularly when you look at elderly care.
Yes.
There is a study we recently sponsored with that actually more than 25% of the people would prefer to be cared by a robot with significant artificial intelligence than a grumpy nurse. So it is definitely something where you can improve the quality of life. But just think about it. If you can have a person be at home in their trusted and comfort zone for another 5 to 6 years, rather than being taken out of that environment, is great. But for me, a little bit closer to home in the production area is really worker safety and public safety. So worker safety, we are working on solutions, finding people in manufacturing places, protecting people, but public safety, I think, will be pretty close to the medical case, given that we have another 1 billion and 2 billion people come in the next decades into the cities, and it will be way, way more crowded. It is a concern, and IoT can help a great extent to improve their lives. It's the basic essence of survival of people.
Yeah, thank you very much. On the privacy topic speaks against at least the last two very much.
Yes.
So. Okay, now I'd like to open up.
The healthcare as well.
I'd like to open up to questions from the audience. Here comes the first question, second and third one, yes.
I have a question regarding combination of vocal intonation and voice commands, right? And we've seen that for instance, Amazon with the Echo or Alexa software program is actually offering people or even patients voice commands, and it's predicted that by 2020, 50% of all commands on the internet will be by vocal commands. My question is regarding this aspect, how do you foresee that this will actually impact the other Internet of Things industries? Because this is definitely something that the consumers would like, and they are moving very fast forward. It actually did save Amazon, that they are now being evaluated as a $700 billion US company, and it's projected that Alexa alone will generate around $100 billion US revenues by a couple of years. So what's your comment on this whole area, also related to your, Kitano, your comments on healthcare, because there's definitely a lot that we can learn from this with vocal intonation.
Sure.
Yeah. I think this Amazon Alexa and Echo and also Google Home and other things actually will be one of the interface that we're going to use, but probably not going to be the only interface, but one of the interface that people use. And for the Amazon-wise, I mean, I can't really speak for Amazon because I'm not involved, but it's logical for them to actually expand the actual access the interface with the consumers, because they have like a web base and they have like an Amazon Echo and they got Amazon Dash, and so they want to actually expand, access to the Amazon service, either the e-commerce or music or videos. So it's logical they can actually have the full spectrum of the interaction with the users, and they can streamline with all the logistics, from the Amazon robotics and all that. So I think it makes sense for them. For other companies, actually, because a backend service is not as rich as Amazon's, whether how they're going to actually expand from this the voice entry. Is not very clear, but obviously a voice interface would be one of the interface would be by default actually. That's not a question anymore. Then what was the second question? Oh, yeah. So if you have all the voice, you can actually keep monitoring the voice, and then and then also you can actually have active interventions, because you can ask for example Amazon Echo or whatever it is, can ask a question or initiate a dialogue, so you can see the reactions. Like a slight change in voice or tremor, or like a slight delay in the reactions can actually detect some anomalies, right? So like for the healthcare wise, more sensors the better. So like it's a trade-off. Like we're talking about privacy, but like if you want to have a care, you have to give up the don't have to give up the privacy, but you have to have more sensors around. So like it doesn't mean that you have to give up the privacy, but you have to trust someone. Because you'll be seen by the machines or some service provider. Otherwise, you normally won't be detected. So like the trustful service provider gonna be the key, and then that will actually, will be very powerful because like outpatients, like the hospital, it's only the on spot. But this one, continuous monitoring, that will dramatically change the quality of the diagnosis.
Okay, thank you. There was a second question here, third here, green, fourth, fifth. Yep.
Thank you very much for your great talk. I'm Kitano from Japan, and I study medicine. I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Kitano about the last thing you talked about. It overlaps a bit with the last question as well, but I'm pretty much interested in the idea of using Internet of Things and wearable devices to utilize the life log to do personalized medicine. But there's also a problem. There's also need to be a platform to effectively collect the data and safely store the data. So my question is, do you think that kind of precision medicine is happening in the near future, or do you think you're gonna need lots more effort to actually realize it?
Okay, so I actually, aside from Sony, I have my own research institutions, what called the Systems Biology Institute, which actually work with a major pharmaceutical in Japan and outside of Japan. And I can't really go into detail, but there are a few plans for to do the clinical studies using IoT and wearable devices and sensors around, particularly for dementia, Parkinson's patients. So it's not just one company. It's multiple companies, major pharmaceutical companies looking into that direction. Although it's in very early clinical proof of concept phase. But if some of these actually get successful and they got the specific value delivered to the patient, I think that will be a very obvious thing to do. And particularly the pharma company wants to have a very clear clinical endpoint measurement for the drug they are providing. At this moment, they actually a very subjective, caretakers survey or doctors on-spot survey, which is very coarse. And then and that actually could be one of the reasons they won't get the clinical endpoint to get the FDA approval. If we get the much more precise continuous monitoring, they might actually have a much better precise patient call selection and the clinical endpoint result. So that would be, I think, would be mandatory. But that's early to say. But I think chances are very good that we can actually successful the clinical trial. But please ask that question 3 years from now. Then probably a first phase of the trial will be finished.
I think you're the next one.
Is it? Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your tremendous insights. In the light of recent developments, I was wondering, I think quite recently the US decided to abolish the net neutrality, which in principle allows some people preferential access to internet and the connectivity of things, which in turn opens up avenues for, well, great abuse of power. Could you elaborate a bit on the repercussions of this development on companies' business models who basically sustain on connectivity to the internet, and which this means on collaboration with the governments and, yeah, other implications? Thank you.
Yes. I mean, net neutrality is something for us, for example, as a company, is a very important value. And, we are being very vocal to sustain net neutrality, but of course, we live in different societies, we see things might happen. And of course, if these things happen, we have this scenario that some business models, some smaller companies, some less mission-critical companies from a government perspective would lose access or would be slowed down in their business. So I think, again, a societal issue where we need a little bit more of an international consensus, as of many other things like cybersecurity as well, where really we need to have countries sitting around the table and having a common vision how we want to work together in the future. So very, very good question.
I mean, the thing I would add, it is a responsibility from companies like ours to be part of that dialogue with governments. So we have people who specifically look into that, are part of standardization bodies, are part of legal advisory groups, to make sure that the common interest is balanced between what the state is aiming to go after and what we as, I would say, the businesses like to have. It is a concern. We watch it very, very carefully. The question is how quickly can we discover it? Can we discover it ahead of time? And that would be our ideal scenario. So we have a lot of proactive movements that this is not discovered when it's almost too late, when it is just already creating some impact or adverse impact on people, populations, businesses, etc.
Thank you. I think the next question was it you, or was it you who went first? Right? Just go on, please. Yeah.
So what I was wondering about is, what do you think, how disruptive is IoT for a healthcare system? So in theory, as you said, if you put sensors everywhere nowadays, so you have your Fitbit wristband, and I don't know, you can measure how many hours you sleep. So you think insurers one day will already know that you are getting sick before you know that you are sick. So basically that your phone can order an aspirin before you develop a headache, say. So you think this is something that is coming in the near future, or this is very far-fetched?
I would say it's already there. In parts, you have great innovation as well out of Switzerland. I don't know if you heard about a company called BioVotion. They already built a device that is providing, absolute precision. You can wear it day and night. You don't even notice that you are wearing a device. So it's there. So at points of the information change, you already have the information you need. The question is, especially in this country with the fragmented health system we have, do we have, the societal will to make these data available? And the question is, for the moment, is clearly no. We don't want to have that. So I think we will see as well this Swiss technology really come to life in other parts of the world. So I expect some news, especially out of Asia or other continents, but certainly not in Switzerland or in Germany or anything else. So I think we're already far advanced and more advanced that we actually know.
I think it's like, very early diagnosis or countermeasure, actually measures. It's coming, and some of them there. But what is very difficult is behavioral change. There's a whole lot of startup actually come to me and asking for the angel investments, and this is like a exercise app, and transform the people's behavior. People can actually lose the weight or behave better. Assuming people want to be healthier. Okay, and it's none of them survived. Okay, the assumption is people want to be healthy if people don't have to do anything. And that's transformation change is tough. And I haven't got anyone succeeded in making transformation in a serious way. I mean, there are few people who always wanted to change, and then that segment will change anyway, but they will change with an app or service anyway. Someone who actually need like a type 2 diabetes, marginal risk group, and eating too much, and less exercise, and transforming the behavior of this person, no.
We need more psychologists, a lot more.
Okay, thank you. First you.
So, my name is Marianne Castro. I come from Brazil, and I wanted to thank you for sharing your knowledge with us this afternoon. I have a question, specifically for Mrs. Marianne Janik. If you see in the development of the Internet of Things, gender bias as an issue. Some commentators mentioned, for example, that servitude roles in this technology, like Alexa and Siri, at least in the beginning, had female voices. Mm-hmm. And if you happen to see this as an issue, gender bias, how would you tackle it? Thank you.
No, thanks for your question. I think to broaden it up, it's more the general question of bias in a culture. If we look at artificial intelligence and machine learning, everything we have in us as humans, all the data we produce and give, will have that bias, and gender bias is a reality in most of societies. So we have to be extremely careful, and that's general for all the bias, because the machine would exactly learn what he's been fed with and taught. So that's a big, big issue, and it's not only gender bias, it's bias in general. So very, very good question.
Let me ask the nasty question. All of your AI guys, how many are female?
Quite a lot. You would be surprised when you look at, and there are some government-funded studies or supported studies, actually all the jobs. Let me just back up a little bit. When, similar to Japan, a lot of our Western societies do suffer from baby boomers going out of business. Actually, in Germany, between 2020 and 2030, is about 6.8 million people. And we are grateful that we have artificial intelligence and we have IoT solutions which really give us more productivity while we lose the labor at the same time. When you look at the roles and the jobs which are AI-based, the new jobs we see is about 2.3, 2.4 million in return, are very friendly towards female. Because a lot of it requires an excessive amount of emotional capabilities. New roles we see, we have clear preference. When you look at our portfolio of master students in the company, we have about 300 people, 300 supported master students, which do a dual study. We have at least half of them female. Very different, and we are talking about engineering, we're talking about physics, we're talking about real hard technology parts, which moves in that direction. It's not the social part anymore. You would be surprised.
Yeah. Oh, I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
And
I don't.
AI supports it. AI-based roles support female.
So our observations are very different. Although we are really working hard.
Because you're biased on this, right?
Oh, we're biased. I'm super biased. So very different observation, and I think a long way in front of us. First of all, there is a war for talent anyhow, so it's notwithstanding the gender to find the right talents here, and not. So we think there's way to go to have.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, to go back into the schools. We're still there where the professors told the girls that's not for you. You should do something else. Especially in this country, we have that as well. Germany the same. So I think there is work to do.
I mean, in my case, we were about 2 to 3% female engineers at the time I studied.
Exactly.
And
So
we're at 45 now. It's a very different perspective. Where you're absolutely right, the higher in the ranks, so managerial jobs or executive roles, it gets very thin in that area. So if you would say you have an R&D lead, there you don't have a 50-50 distribution any longer.
No, by far.
There you're absolutely right.
No.
Okay, Thomas, please.
IoT is obviously a buzzword that draws a lot of attention. Another buzzword, which is at least loosely related to it, and I'm surprised it hasn't been mentioned yet, is blockchain. And I guess we all agree in this room that blockchain is there to stay. But I've also observed that, at least in the Western world, companies, the big companies, software as well as hardware companies, have been quite cautious in terms of communicating their blockchain strategies. Maybe there are no strategies, but I'm sure you see use cases in how you are going to use blockchain in your own companies. I'd be interested to hear from a software as well as from a hardware perspective where you see the blockchain use cases in your companies.
So let me take it. So for the internal part, we take it quite a bit for our supply chain security, where we put smart contracts, blockchain based.
Already today?
Yes, today. On the external side, is not matured yet to real business, but one of the business case we have, which is a pilot, where we have funding from automotive companies, is actually an interesting one insofar. Think about a car can be turned into a money-making machine, can be a wallet, by selling sensor data. Selling sensor data like the rain sensor will be sold to a weather service provider and will be put on a platform. We've meanwhile obtained funding to generate that. So I really see that there is, with blockchain now, the opportunity, that's why we're a big fan of it, blockchain, the opportunity to take some of the data and monetize it, which was the premise of Google and all the over-the-top telco providers. So I really see that there is a balance back in that way, which can help, particularly on the private side, the consumer of a car, of a service.
Yes.
I think the blockchain is very interesting technology, and we have to separate from the cryptocurrency and the blockchain. The cryptocurrency is probably going to hope to be stabilized in the future, but at this moment it's very turbulent. Like China banned it and then moved to the Russia or some other places. We'll see what happens. But the blockchain itself, I think, is a very valuable distributed ledger system. But at the same time, the question is. Completely open blockchain using a proof of work is too expensive, energy-wise. Actually, energy consumption is prohibitive, and it's not going to be practical. But I think we end up having a consortium or a private blockchain using Ethereum or whatever the mechanism backing up, because for example, if you want a financial transaction, big bank or bank consortium will be able to actually come up with the cost-effective and then lightweight blockchain which does things instead of a proof of work. So or the supplier, big companies like Hewlett, Packard, Sony can actually get the private or consortium blockchain for the supply chain or the equipment, right? So if you have some trustful companies or group which actually back up the legitimacy of the transactions, you don't have to go to the proof of work. That actually will be a big game changer in terms of the energy consumption, in terms of computing needs. So I think if you got that way, I think blockchain gonna be one of the infrastructure. But if you dream at a DAO, no, I don't think DAO, aside from the older niche market, DAO is not practical, because one of the issues, one is the energy. The other thing is a DAO is no one take care of that, right? That means you consumer will have to have entire counterparty risk. If you deal with someone, the guy is bad, there's no place you can complain about it. So DAO to me is, aside from the niche market, it's not very practical. You're going to be private or consortium blockchain.
Okay. I think it is a hype cycle which blockchain has to go through. We have qualified some of the early blockchains like Bitcoin out for manufacturing because of the transaction cost of roughly €10 per transaction. The time it takes to synchronize the distributed ledger. So we learned it, and sometimes we didn't know before. So these POCs are quite extensive to do. So we need to be selective on it. But the automotive will most probably be the front-running one, where people invest in it because it's compelling. For just one last example on it, if you look at odometer theft and betrayal, so people just falsifying the amount of kilometers on the meter before they sell the car, is a double-digit billion brand damage for the automotive industry. And when there is so much money in it, blockchain will get a boost for being deployed. So you need to look at the cases basically where there is economic value to go for.
Yes, and the concept, I think, as you said, because not every scenario will be applicable. So it's important to try and to see what works and what is not working. In the food chain, for example, blockchain is there as well. But the thing is that really, from the energy point of view, the most viable thing? So it's top of mind, but more as a concept, as than implementing it everywhere.
Okay, so we have 3 final questions with 3 final short answers. So first question here, and then 2 questions in the background. Oh, yeah, we take another one. Yes, please.
So thank you. I want to ask a question about data. So the strength of machine learning, it very much feeds on both the depth of data and also the spread of data. So the more you have, obviously, the better your software is. So I just want to ask, how do your companies deal or compete against, for example, if let's say you're within an operating environment, against actually countries that operate in a system where data privacy and the spread of data is a lot more available? How do you then keep your competitive advantage?
I mean, the honest answer is it's difficult. It's not an easy way forward. I mean, as a global company, we're trying to play with it and really understand what function do we put where. But a global distributed supply chain cannot get away from it. So we have to deal with it. The way we do it, we just grab it and try to lobby and try to work it out.
Okay. Gentleman in the back, please. Yes.
So my question is pretty simple. In the world which requires very high technical skills, I mean the digital world, what's your advice for business students who have no skills at all?
Well, I shouldn't answer that. So.
No. Very
for
clear.
the business, I think like you're still young to be, have an in-depth understanding of science and technology. I think like now the some major companies, even if you are not in head of the technology company, you need to have an in-depth understanding of science and technology. That I think mandatory to be the business leader from now, because some of the technical misunderstanding or the wrong decisions on a company might actually have to have serious impacts on the future. It not be if that's not immediate, but like in 5-10 years, that make me simple mistake on the technology choice will have a huge cost that they have to pay in the future.
Yeah. But I have a good news, because as we are all in the sort of war for talents, a lot of companies, including Microsoft, are starting really company-owned reskilling programs for any faculties, so people joining will automatically be reskilled on the technology. But of course, if you could start earlier, the earlier the better.
And your question is the reason why this university just builds up a school of computer science.
Yeah.
Second last question.
Good news.
Hi.
So 2 more to go. Second last. Third.
Hello.
Second last.
Hi, my name is Charles. I'm from Nigeria. We've talked a lot about the development and implications of IoT technologies from the Americas to Europe to Asia. And I've not heard quite much the mention of Africa.
Yes.
It's okay, I forgive you guys. But I ask primarily because I know that all three of your companies have big markets in Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana. And I'm curious about two things majorly. One is, what do you think is the future of IoT technologies in Africa in the short term, especially taking into account the fact that electricity and internet are still big issues in Nigeria and many other places? And secondly, from organizational point of views, what are your visions, what are your directions for the products you build, and how do you want to apply them in the African context? Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please.
We do not have any technology development operation in the African region at this moment. There's a mention about this big software success in Africa in a previous session, but what we are doing is actually using our IoT and AI technology to transform the agriculture practice in Burkina Faso at this moment. And instead of having monoculture, which actually has one crops, and that actually causing a significant reduction in biodiversity and cause of desertifications, we're actually planting multiple crops, very large number of crops, and get the biodiversity and the stability of the agriculture income. So we actually, in a 2-year study, we could have actually increased the agriculture income of the farmer by 20 times, not 20%, 20 times actually. And that became quite substantial. And we're actually spreading much larger experiments in Burkina Faso and in neighboring countries as well. And that actually requires, mobile phone for the sensor system to camera. And all the data is in Tokyo. We do all the data analytics and send back what they're supposed to do in the Burkina Faso. And we probably able to do a local operation as well in the future. It's a very early stage of pilot study, but we are actually going very strongly big in the helping the Sub-Saharan Africa agriculture and in biodiversity issues. But that's something we see the future there, but we are making a very modest start at this moment.
Just to stay in time, we accept one other question, and then we make just a very short closing statement. Please, Janik.
In operating the AI machine, somebody got to give sort of a final directive based upon a certain value standard. I wonder if you think that the private owner of the machine should have the authority of providing the directive all the time, or at certain point, some kind of official intervention, regulatory intervention is called for. I suppose the conflict of value standard may occur, for instance, between profit maximization motive and corporate social responsibility consideration. Thank you.
Who wants to tackle that one?
Yeah, we already
Maybe
mentioned...
we make the final statements, we incorporate this very
okay.
valid question into the final statement. You want to start?
Okay. No, as a final statement, thank you for raising this question, because especially looking at artificial intelligence, and we see that we need these ethical principles, and the AI partner orgs was already mentioned. So I think there is a way in front of us to exactly come to a point where we can be sure that any artificial intelligence-based application will have some key principle built in, like that everything should be human-centric, that a human being should be able to intervene and stop. So that, I think, being inherited in that concept of cooperation that we need to bring Internet of Things and artificial intelligence with it to life, we will need to agree as mankind on these kind of principle. And I think some things have been started, but we need a big momentum to deal with it, and the same applies on the negative side on cyber as well. What we are willing to accept on cyber, and certainly not willing to accept that governance attack civilians on the cyber side on Internet of Things.
Thank you, Marianne.
Well, I think this question is a very common question being asked. But technically, there's no AI system which actually make independent decisions. Okay, AI system, when they make decision behave, that's a result of the design, result of data we feed in. So like all the behavior the AI make is actually completely depends on the data set designer provide. So it's not AI making decision. It's the designer train AI to behave a specific way. So it's wrong to actually consider AI as an independent free will entity. That's completely nonsense actually. So it's a designer or a data or the engineer or a company train an AI system to behave a specific way. So the issue which she mentioned is, what is the data set we should provide? Should the data set we should provide take care of the ethical consideration, therefore the outcome behavior around module behavior behave properly? So it's, so that's actually completely on our side. Because if we don't train AI specific way, AI don't behave differently. So that's actually, so the key is what is the data set we should provide, and that's the fundamental, most important part in AI design and development.
So it's your responsibility.
That's a human responsibility, designer's responsibility.
But the architecture as well.
Yes,
it's all about the architecture.
That's a human. It's nothing like an AI, which is an independent alien kind of thing. That's something we create after all. So our responsibility.
Thank you, Hiroaki.
So I think that the constituencies like the government, like the large corporations, like the universities, they have three key responsibilities. The first one is really lower the barrier of entry for accessing technology. So that's our responsibility. We need to make technology available, package it, so that people who not necessarily have the big dollars can access it, play with it. The second one is we need to lower the barrier of accessing the learning and the education, and making that really sure that people can access it, can access the knowledge around it. And the third area is really provide a legal, stable framework which is not compromised, which people can rely on and take decisions. It cannot be a corruption, it cannot be anything, it needs to be absolutely stable to do that. And I think these three pillars have to work on that. Universities, corporations, and the government, and then it will work. And let's keep in mind, we have not picked up in Europe on some technologies which we should have, because we've debated those and we've seen others taking them much faster than they should have. And we own that technology, we've developed it here, we have to capitalize on it. For example, the point you raised on machines going independent. We're talking about IQ as intelligent quotients. There's half of a human being right now, but there's nothing inside for an EQ, an emotional quotient, on all those machines. It's a long way, and the interaction between those two systems, the human beings and the machine, is something which fundamentally will stay.
So thank you very much for you being here, listening for 1.5 hours to what we are discussing here. Thank you very much for the plenum. I think you deserve an applaud for all your statements. Thank you so much. We come here to an end. Very striking was that we not once had the question from the audience whether artificial intelligence or the Internet of Things would kill work. Obviously, we are the wrong audience here for discussing that question. Maybe next year. So thank you very much and see you. Yeah.